You're listening to This Week in E-Commerce, the Ecom Nation podcast. Dive into the top online retail headlines with your hosts, Paul Waddy and Mal Chia. Let's load up the cart. This Week in E-Commerce, episode 71. I am Mal Chia, back with you for an action-packed show. There's a lot happening this week in e-commerce, especially with January 26th approaching. Now, we are definitely seeing that interesting shift in how retailers are approaching this day, as they have been for the last few years, with what was traditionally a lot of marketing and sales events. I know in my past, I've definitely done these events, either through Uber Eats and some other brands I've worked with before, but now a lot of major brands are starting to take a bit of a step back and acknowledging both Australia Day and January 26th as a bit of a day of reflection. And interestingly, some are actually now giving employees the choice whether to work on this day or not, instead of taking a holiday. So this is part of the evolving nature of retail. And you can see Woolworths and Kmart moving away from selling Australia Day merchandise, while other brands are now focusing just on doing a summer sale, which doesn't actually necessarily have that Australia Day branding. And for a lot of retailers, it does create that question around, it doesn't just need to be transactional, that it's really important for brands to take a step back from the transaction and to understand what the zeitgeist is, to ensure that we are understanding of what's actually happening out there on a broader cultural context. And different brands, may or may not be posting now on social media about it, but it's really important just to make sure you do have that balance between that. So, and I think more and more people are looking to brands to really be cultural leaders, not just to sell stuff, but to really lead culture and be part of that cultural conversation. So that's a really interesting shift, which we can see right here in Australia through Australia Day. But moving on to one of the first topics that I'm going to talk about today is around Amazon, where Amazon have made their latest move, which they've recently made 200 roles redundant across North America. Now, Amazon, biggest retailer in the world, online retailer in the world, news like this is pretty significant in the sense that when we see Amazon make a cut, we start to think that, hang on, maybe we need to be conscious that there may be some problems coming up in the market. But in this case, I wouldn't really be too worried about this, because this is something Amazon does fairly routinely. Amazon has a really great culture in terms of how they are constantly looking at themselves and thinking about how can we make things leaner? How can we make the boat go faster, as the old saying goes? And for Amazon, they're incredible at this. They've got a really fantastic culture in that they're always looking for how do they cut out bureaucracy, in particular how do they cut out middle management and ensure things are getting done faster. So most of these cuts have also just happened with the Buy with Prime team, which for Australian retailers and Australian consumers we probably aren't really aware of at the moment, but essentially means that if you are on a third-party website such as your own, let's say, you can offer the option for your customers to check out with Prime and then have it fulfilled through FBA, so that's fulfilled by Amazon. So this is a big bet which Amazon actually made a few years ago to extend Prime into other websites. So, which is a great way for people to be leveraging their Prime membership more rather than just on the Amazon ecosystem. So it's pretty cool, right? However, these cuts probably suggest that the program isn't growing as quickly as it could be. So that doesn't necessarily mean that they're canning it. It just means that potentially, it's not taking the direction they wanted it to take. So we can probably expect to see a few more changes when it comes to Buy with Prime. And I dare say it's probably something we're going to see in Australia pretty soon. So immediately, it's not really something which is overly concerning for the Australian market. And in the US, if you are using Buy with Prime, it's something just to keep an eye on, that you may experience some changes in how the service operates. Potentially customer support may be a little bit slower, unsure at this stage. But at a broader context, it's not really something to worry about, because Amazon, after their pandemic boom, where they increased their headcount by somewhere like almost 1 million new employees, they've laid off about 27,000 of that as they continue to right-size that. So Amazon had a bit of flex in the fact that they were continuing to grow quite rapidly, so we're able to actually right-size their organizational structure and cut the dead weight, so to speak, and lean themselves up. And I think this is just a continuation of that, where they focused on things, new things, realized it's not working, decided to right size a little bit, and also don't forget they are continuing to invest quite heavily into AI and robotics. So they're definitely still placing a lot of bets out there. But this is just something, some news, which if you do see it, nothing really to be concerned about, I would say at this stage. Now, some positive news, which I do want to talk about next, is a brand which we probably don't talk about enough, which is New Balance, which over the last few years has become a really huge success story. Now, New Balance growing up, I never wanted a pair of New Balance shoes. New Balance were always seen as being your dad's sneakers. Yeah, they were kind of like the not so cool sneakers which older gentlemen, let's say, would wear because they were comfy and they weren't very fashionable, right? But last year, they reported a 20% increase in sales, with overall sales, global sales, reaching $7.8 million. Now, that isn't just good growth, that is exceptional growth in what was an incredibly challenging year for retail as a whole. So we've been looking at this and just trying to understand, how did they actually do this? How was this brand able to grow 20%, which is far larger than most of their competitors? Okay, in this really tough market. And when we did some digging into this, it was clear that there were a few things which were driving this. Number one is in terms of their digital transformation, that they really focused on building a really clear and really cool digital ecosystem around all their products. So not just a website, but also a mobile app as well, which connected with tracking and training programs and recommendations for runners, to create this whole digital ecosystem in which you could experience the brand, similar to what Nike did very successfully with Nike Run Club, the Nike Fitness Tracker, etc. Then they also looked at a balanced distribution strategy. New Balance had historically been very wholesale focused, so working with a lot of on-sellers of their product, but in the last few years really started to focus on their own D2C operations, but able to do that, whereas Nike did that and went overextended into one area. New Balance were able to strike a really good mix between the two, and a really strategic mix, where while they had the major retailers on side and they were giving them exclusive shoes, to sell in their stores, colorways, things like that, they continued to build their online presence as well. That way, every party and every single touch point had its own unique points of differentiation, and all of them were able to thrive. And thirdly, they started looking at marketing and collaborations, and how do they actually become culturally relevant again. And they've done this in a number of ways, but most prominently right now, because it is tennis season in Australia, is their partnership with the Australian Open. So with the Australian Open, with Coco Gauff, who they sponsor, they've been leveraging all these partnerships to really push heavily into tennis and show the world that they are really aligned with tennis as a sport, as well as running and also basketball as well. So they're focusing on these sports and really doing what Nike did a long time ago, sponsoring these sports and really showing that they are part of that community. They're not just interlopers, but they're deeply embedded in those communities, of tennis, of running, of basketball. So that's fantastic growth. And if you look at the specific numbers as well, digital sales are now 35% of their total revenue. That's the digital D2C sales. Their app in the last year, 45 increase in active users, and their customer retention rate has improved by 28%. So you take all these numbers together, and that is just fantastic growth for New Balance. And that this digital transformation was more than just about the website. It's about extending their whole customer experience to create this really integrated experience for their customers, no matter where they are, and for people to experience the brand wherever they are as well. And also then partnering with lots of different sports and really focusing in on them and really getting embedded in them. We're getting really embedded in the DNA of those sports, rather than just ducking in there, paying a few athletes and hoping for the best. They really made sure that they were part of that. Now, the really big news for the week, though, is what's probably happened and then unhappened in a very, very short period of time, which is, as a lot of you would know, as Paul and I have been talking about for better part of 12 months now, is that TikTok was headed for a ban if they weren't able to sell to an American buyer. And on Sunday, US time, TikTok was finally shut down. Actually, they shut themselves down ahead of the ban actually happening. So we saw a lot of things on the news with that ban coming into place, and TikTok putting up a message to all US users to say that the service was no longer active. And in fact, in the last week, we saw a lot of growth in competitor apps such as Rednote, which is another Chinese-owned app, which was continuing to gain a lot of new customers as well. And then very suddenly this morning, so also Sunday US time, so Sunday evening US time, is that TikTok was suddenly back on. And what happened was that it happened because Donald Trump posted something on Truth Social, his social network, just saying that he would undo the ban as soon as he came into power, officially took office. So that's a lot to kind of think about in a very short period of time. But essentially what happened was that the House in America, they passed a bill that gave ByteDance, which was TikTok's parent company, 165 days to sell the app or face a ban across the US app stores. This bill surprisingly passed with really strong bipartisan support, which is almost unheard of. That's Democrats and Republicans coming together and actually agreeing on something. So that was in itself quite remarkable, and something which made a lot of people think that this was something which was definitely going to happen, and gave a lot of people confidence of that as well. But that changed. And a lot of this was because of concerns about TikTok's data collection, about how they were collecting and mining a lot of data from US users, and also about alleged ties with the Chinese government, which has been speculated upon for many, many years. And I know I myself, are pretty bullish on the fact that there definitely is some Chinese government involvement in that, but also that all these issues, as they've just grown and grown to a boiling point, not much was being done because TikTok wasn't able to be sold. They weren't able to find a buyer for it over the last 165 days. And from an e-commerce perspective, TikTok had also evolved quite a lot as well. That it had evolved from being just about social media and sharing content with your community to, in the last couple of years, particularly in the US, the growth of TikTok Shop, which is now valued at $20 billion. Which generates about $20 billion in GMV, so gross merchandise value coming through the app. So again, there's a lot of things there, which all came into this. But what then happened was that as we got closer to the ban, and Donald Trump in November won the election, particularly through a lot of people sharing content and supporting him on TikTok, he very famously reversed his position. Because a lot of you might not remember, but back in about 2020 or maybe even 2019, Donald Trump was one of the advocates for trying to get TikTok banned. Matter of fact, he was a person who first said he would ban TikTok. But suddenly, as is his wont, when he found that TikTok users were actually supportive of him, he changed his tune completely and wanted to keep TikTok. And matter of fact, said that there's some very good people on TikTok. I want to make sure that we rescue the platform, and had been saying it for quite some time. And this is despite the fact that there was bipartisan support from both the left and the right, and then also a recent Supreme Court ruling which upheld the ban as well. So a lot of parties trying to ban TikTok, and then Donald Trump essentially vetoing it with his executive power and potentially giving it a bit of an extension as well. But what we've seen though with that is that there were definitely winners and losers along that path. A lot of people have said that the last couple of years, especially, you could see that one of the winners was Instagram. With Instagram releasing their new features such as Instagram Reels, also YouTube Shorts as well, seeing an influx of creators moving to those platforms because of the uncertainty which was surrounding TikTok and what could happen with it. But then also looking at the American tech sector as a whole and looking at, okay, well, who actually stands to win and who stands to lose from this as well. And as a whole, you can probably imagine that American tech companies would probably be supportive of this, because you could see a lot of like the top talent, a lot of top engineers moving to TikTok and taking them away from the Facebooks and the Googles of the world. So now that war for talent, there's one less player in the market. And you could also see from a Meta point of view that Meta's the spending on advertising on Meta has continued to increase. And while the TikTok business has grown, it's still relatively small compared to Meta. And if you can see more people moving to spend money on Meta ads, that obviously means that they're the winner from this. And you can see that with how much their advertising has grown over the last 12 months. But some of the losers from all this as well was that influencers were having to find different business models, particularly influencers who launched on TikTok were suddenly faced with the fact that there could be a ban and there might have to be a change in how they do business as well. But also looking at ByteDance as well, which is TikTok's parent company. What were their expansion plans going to look like? Were they able to continue to expand as they had hoped in the US? Now, the interesting thing, though, is that as a whole, ByteDance relies very, very little on TikTok to generate revenue. Matter of fact, ByteDance generates the majority of its revenue from Douyin, which is the Chinese version of TikTok. So yes, in China, mainland Chinese people, they use Douyin, not TikTok. And that's where they generate most of their revenue from. So something to consider, did they even really want to bother with a fight, given from an economic point of view, it probably didn't matter a whole lot to them. But then the challenge also for a lot of brands out here who will be listening is that a lot of product discovery still happens on TikTok. Matter of fact, TikTok continues to increase up the rankings as being a really, really powerful search engine. So there's a lot to really unpack with this story, and I don't really have any prognostications or any forecasts in terms of what could potentially happen. But I dare say that this ban will happen, and a ban is going to be in place because all Trump can really do is to put a hold on it. He can't veto the ban completely. So what it probably means is that there will be an extension of some sort in order for TikTok to find a buyer for its US operations or for some sort of compromise to be reached between TikTok and the US government. So there could be a sale on the cards for TikTok. Matter of fact, in 2020, Microsoft attempted to buy TikTok. So it could happen. But what's the value of TikTok now, considering how much you'd have to do to change the operations? Who knows? Although we could probably look to Twitter or X now as an example of what could happen, that you could be looking at something in that $40 billion range, depending on how much money TikTok's actually revenue it's actually generating, I should say. But also, are there going to be future legal battles when it comes to TikTok? And so might we be able to find that middle ground of finding, a way to actually have that stricter data controls and that oversight, which avoids an outright ban of the platform if a buyer can't be found. So from an e-commerce point of view, TikTok definitely is not going away anytime soon. And matter of fact, it is only just going away in the US if it does happen. There is no talk about that happening in Australia. So from an advertising point of view, it is still there as a channel to experiment with, both from a paid point of view, but also organically as well, to continue posting on that. And we always advocate for experimentation to continue to grow your business here. So definitely keep an eye on both what's happening in the regulatory environment, and we will continue to update you on the podcast, but also don't stop your TikTok efforts either. Continue to spend there while you can and experiment and see what sort of new audiences you can reach. So we're going to wrap it up here as we head into the Australia Day weekend. I hope that everyone here is able to take the time out and come back refreshed again. I know we've just come off a break, but hopefully we can take another break, come back refreshed, because e-commerce is super dynamic. It's always changing, as these stories will show you. So whether you're running a small Shopify store or managing a major retail operation, you do need to stay nimble. You do need to stay flexible and adaptable through this time as well. So in closing, that's all we got this week for This Week in E-commerce. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and join us on Instagram or LinkedIn, and feel free to message us. We're really keen to hear from you guys. So until then, keep selling, keep innovating, and keep growing.